Hey guys, this is a quick video on how to replace the front wheel hub assembly on a 2016 Ram 2500 diesel. This has four-wheel drive, of course, and we're also replacing the bearings and brakes on the rears. But we're going to start with the front. I've already done the front right. I thought I would go ahead and do the front left because I've seen a couple of the videos on YouTube and I've got a slightly different way of removing the hub. And I'm not using any impact wrenches either. I know that there's some folks out there that have a vehicle like this and they don't have the impact wrenches. You are going to need some stout tools and a little bit of elbow grease, but you can get this thing done with some minimal stuff. In fact, you know, I don't want to spoil the surprise, so let me get the lugs loosened up with my lug wrench and get the vehicle up on jack stands. I'm going to lift the entire vehicle because once the wheel is off, I'm going to need to spin the steering wheel left and right to access a few of the bolts, as you're going to see. All right, let me get these bolts off, let me get the wheel off, and I'll come back. All right, so I'm just taking the lug wrench that came with the truck and breaking these loose so that once I get this up on a jack stands, I can take the lugs off without the wheel spinning on me. All right, that was it. Okay, now I'm just going to use the jack that came with the truck. I mean, I haven't invested in a trolley jack that's capable of lifting this vehicle, and you know, I will one day maybe, but for right now I can get by with this. So again, everything is nice and quiet. I don't know, maybe it's just me getting older, but I'm not a huge fan of the impact wrenches. They just make a huge amount of racket, and you can get the job done much quieter, much more peaceful. Take your time, relax, enjoy that you're outdoors, and get the job done. So I'm going to lift this thing up now. Okay, so that's one wheel up off the ground. I've got a good jack stand supporting it. Now I'm going to move the jack over to the other side, do the same thing to the other wheel. All right, here we go. All right, and now we'll just remove the lug nuts and the wheel. And these things, if they're anything like the front right, they just spin off. Again, no need for an impact wrench. Obviously, if you're dealing with rusty studs, you're not going to have the easy time that I am. But it's not a bad idea to put a little anti-seize on these things. Just a little. You're torquing them down. You're not going to walk off. Okay, so the next step is to remove the caliper. We can do that nicely by turning the wheel all the way to the right. That's where we jacked up the whole front end, is so we could swivel the knuckle back and forth as we need to. So this is a 24mm socket on a 2-foot handle. That way I got the leverage to be able to get these 2 bolts broken loose. And we'll move the bracket out of the way. And some people have some bungee cords that they use. I happen to have zip ties. I'll just zip tie it to the spring and make sure I protect the brake line from getting crimped. All right, let me turn the wheel. Okay, now we'll just get access to these bolts. One. There's 2. And these are also hand tight once you break them loose. Pretty colossal bolts. There's 1. I'm sure I did that too fast for you guys to have seen it. This one's sticking in here. So much for hand tight. There we go. And there it is. Here's the second bolt. I'll set these aside. In fact, I'm going to have to put these in the garage because it's starting to rain just a little bit. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's take this caliper off and zip tie it to the spring, or use a bungee cord if you got one. All right, that was easy. All right, so this is where it gets trickier. The front right, the rotor was really on there, so my small amount just wasn't cutting it. They didn't put any kind of anti-seize on it when I had the brakes done the last time. This is why I'm just not letting anybody touch the truck anymore. I'm just going to do it myself. And anyway, so I've got a sledge with me, which is way overkill for this. So I'm not going to just go nuts, but I just need a persuader that's going to get the rotor to break free of whatever corrosive bond it's made over the last 60,000 miles. Here we go. There it is. Okay, I'm going to add that to the scrap pile. And now I'm going to move on to the 4 18mm bolts that are on the back side here. You can see this is where I'm going to be accessing 1, 2. You can see them protruding through this wheel hub assembly. There's 2 more on the back side. It's a square profile. So I'm going to get my 18mm socket. I'm going to break them free, but first, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to hit them with some penetrating oil because they are on there to some 150 foot-pounds of torque. Just want to make sure I don't round off any corners because my life would be absolutely miserable if I rounded them off. And by the way, the 18mm that I'm going to use is going to be a hex profile impact socket. So I'm not using the impact wrench, but I am using the impact socket. I wouldn't recommend using a 12-point socket because you'll have a greater chance of rounding a corner. You get more bite on those hex profiles, and that's why impact wrench socket or impact sockets are hex and not 12-point. Okay, so let me go hit this with some penetrating oil, and I'll get a cup of coffee. I'll be right back. Oh boy, so as I was setting things up, I realized I had this whole thing set up in my head, steps that I was going to do. Should have written it down because what I wanted to pull was the axle nut in the center of the hub. It's torqued down to like 260 foot-pounds, and I was going to have, my wife or kids sit up in the cabin, press the brake pedal, hold the rotor in place while I was going to loosen it up. So now I got 2 options. So I'm in the middle of sorting this out. I can either put the rotor back on and see if I can get the caliper back on, and then do what I was planning on doing, or I could try to shortcut it and put a crowbar across a couple of the studs, hope that I don't gum them up too much as I put a 34mm socket on that axle nut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can just get this thing back on real quick, and hopefully there wasn't any residual pressure that caused the pistons to come out. Then I'm going to have to recompress to get it back on the old rotor. Let me give it a whirl. This is what you call rushing, and that's my bad. So don't do what I did. Save yourself having to do steps over twice. All right, let me see if I can get this on. I'm going to hang it from the top. Alright. Stay. I'm going to get the bolt, which I should have gotten. Well, one thing's for sure. I'm not going to try to make it seem like I've got this thing down to a science. Because I have watched a number of these YouTube videos where they've got this thing where it just flows perfectly, which is appreciated to see the steps without all the mistakes. But maybe some of you can identify with what I'm going through right now. Not bad situation. No, this is a pretty easy fix. hand tight. That's all I need. Swap this out, 34 millimeters, and then I'm going to get somebody to press their foot on the brake. We'll loosen up this axle nut right here, which, by the way, I think is crazy that it doesn't have a cotter key that goes through. It's not a castle nut anymore. Doesn't fill me with tons of confidence, but I suppose the engineers over at Mopar knew what they were doing. So anyway, I'll be right back. Okay, so let's see if we can break this axle nut loose. There we go. I'm just going to take it off. Requires somebody to be standing on the brake pedal. If for some reason you don't have enough pressure, you got to crank it. You'll have to crank it up. But I found that this is just fine, as you can see. And my son's turning the wheel. Don't touch the wheel, please. That wasn't a ghost. That was just my kid messing. Alright. And there we go. There's the axle nut. Alright, so now we're going to go back and do the same things we did before. Just remove this, remove that, zip tie this. I'll be back. Okay, so now I've got the 18 millimeter impact socket on a little 1/2 inch drive extension, 2-inch extension on a wrench with a 2-foot handle. It's really important to make sure you got this thing seated so that when you try to break it loose, you're not going to round those corners. And there we go, that's the first one. There's the second one. So whether or not that penetrating oil did the job, I still like to use it just to be on the safe side. But now this thing should just come right out real easy. Okay, there's one. Two. Okay. The next step is to turn the steering wheel all the way to the left, and we can access the other 2 bolts that are part of that wheel hub assembly. Okay, let's see if we can access these. They're a little trickier to see because of the shape of the knuckle. Reason this is switched over to Titan. Alright, that seems to be pretty well seated. Here's the first one. Yeah, I'm not sponsored by these guys, but this Freol penetrating oil works pretty good. At least I think it does. Okay, get the lower one loose. There it is. All right, so we can back these out okay. Up to this point, I haven't removed the ABS sensor line. I'm going to need to do that next because I'm going to be pulling the wheel hub assembly off, you know, after that. Just had it. Come on, Bill. There we go. There's 3. And there's 4. All right, so there's all the mechanical fasteners that needed to come loose. So the next thing I need to do is just follow this ABS sensor line and just disconnect it all the way back until I see that little clip that has the red tab, and you pull up on the red tab until it snaps open. There's other YouTube videos that do a great job of tracing that, so I'm not going to go and make a fuss over it. I'm just going to go ahead and turn off the camera, do that step, and come back with that line dangling. And I'm going to show you guys the better way to remove this wheel hub assembly. It's going to probably save you some time, some swearing, and give you back a little bit of your patience. Okay, so this is the part where I think everybody's interested in seeing how I remove this wheel hub assembly. Instead of hitting on with a hammer or using one of these contraptions that you affix to the studs, like what looks like a trailer hitch type of thing that you whack, what I did was I went to the auto parts store and I rented a 7-ton reversible hub puller. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hook it on here. I modified it. I only have 2 of the claws. They're 180 degrees apart. And I'm just going to put it on here, maybe here and here, to back it off just a little bit to make it fit. Okay, once I've got it, there we go. I'm going to be nice to the hub that I've got, the axle. So I'm going to just put this Sawzall blade in here as a sacrificial piece of metal. It's going to want to walk now, but if I'm careful and keep it centered. This is a 19 millimeter on this guy. It might be different from the one that you find at your auto parts store. I'm just going to start turning this and see if I keep it from walking too much. I might have to readjust. Let's see here. Yep. So back it off just a little bit and recenter. There we go. Now we can keep going. And there it is, just like that. I mean, no banging, no noises. You know, let's keep it quiet, right? All right, so there it is. That's pretty easy. So now I'm just going to follow the procedure of cleaning this area of any debris, get it nice and clean. I'll put a little bit of wheel bearing grease on here just to prevent any further rusting. And I'm going to get some anti-seize on the back part here. But we're on our way now. Alright, so here we go. I'm just going to hit it with some brake cleaner, get all the debris that I scraped loose with that Sawzall blade. I mean, that was good enough to get the gunk off of the wheel hub knuckle area. And I'm just going to put a little light coat of wheel bearing grease where I think it's appropriate, and I'm going to put some anti-seize where I think that's appropriate, and then we'll be ready to install the wheel hub, the new one. So this is great. We're making progress. Here we go. This isn't perfection here, it's just getting it reasonably clean and free of any big chunks of debris. You know, in fact, I see a little bit that I missed right there. There we are. So that's pretty decent. It's starting to rain, so I'm just going to put some of the grease on, and depending on how these clouds go, I might have to take a break. I'm just going to grease this up just so that it's not rusting anymore. Backside of this plate here. Alright. There we go. Lid back on that. Get my anti-seize. Just dress it up. To give you guys a decent angle where you're not seeing just my backside here, but it's making it a little tricky to get the brush on here. Alright, that's, I use way too much here. Something over here. I'm just going to paint this interface right here. And you know, next time I have to do this, I will I'll have a little basis of comparison. I'll be able to say to myself, well, this was definitely the way to do it, or this didn't really make any difference at all. Alright, that looks pretty decent there. So I'll put the cap back on. All that step done. I'm going to go ahead and put the new wheel bearing assembly on. Rain isn't that bad right now, just a little drizzle. So get this out of the way, all my stuff. Just some anti-seize. Pretty clean. Got the labels here for you if you're looking to match what I'm using. I didn't pick it for any real reason other than I just know they'll do the job. I wasn't actually looking at any of the reviews on the products, except for the penetrating oil. I have been looking for a good penetrating oil for a while, and that was pretty decent. Alright, it's starting to get a little rainy out here, so I'm hoping I can kind of button some of this up pretty quickly. Now the next thing I got to do is put the wheel hub assembly onto the spline. I just have to make sure that the ABS cable is pointing at 12 o'clock. I put a little bit of wheel bearing grease on the spline of the wheel hub assembly, so hopefully it'll go together. So here we go. Alright, so that's about as far as it wants to go just by me pushing on it. So you can see if I can get those 19mm bolts to thread in there and draw it in tight. I think that's probably why they gave us the extra 3/8 of an inch. If you look at the earlier part of the video, you'll see that those 4 bolts are protruding past the wheel hub assembly a good amount. It makes you wonder why. Well, this might be the exact reason why. You might need to really kind of wrestle it to the point where you can get those threads to catch on the wheel hub assembly, and then it'll draw it tight. Hang on. see what we have to work with here. I think that's going to work. Okay, so what I need to do, see, this didn't happen on the other wheel. It's a bit of a surprise to me. The other one just slid right on. But I think we just, because I was sitting there wondering why they made these fine thread bolts so long. I think I'm realizing exactly why. Because this is probably the norm that it doesn't want to press on. I'll get a couple threads going here before I move on to the next bolt. All right. There's that one. Just to get that started. There's that one. I'm using my smaller ratchet, so I don't have to worry about turning the wheel. Okay, there's that guy. I'll get the other two. I'll get on my back and do that, and I'll come back in a second. All right, so we got a break in the weather, and I reattached the ABS sensor wire, followed the path, and got it back on there. So now what I need to do is finish torquing the 4 bolts that hold the wheel hub assembly to the knuckle. So that's what I'm going to do right now. This is 150 foot-pounds of torque. There's one. Get an extension on this. I try to torque without an extension if I can, but if I do have to use one, I just have to be a little more careful to make sure that I'm not running at any kind of angles to alter the setting. There we go. There we go. I'll turn the steering wheel back the other way and get the other two. And I saved the most difficult for last. That's not that bad. There we are. So that's torqued down. And now we can put on the rotor. Okay, so we're going to add the rotor now. I will see if I can just hold put this in place with a plug. Not too bad. It just gives me a little more confidence working with the rotor. Okay, so the next thing I got to do is get rid of the zip tie, pull the pads, hit it with some brake cleaner, and start installing the new pads so we can get this thing back together. But one thing I'm going to have to do is compress the pistons in the caliper, and I've got a way of doing that. I'm going to use a C-clamp and just a scrap piece of strapping, construction strapping that I got from Lowe's or Home Depot, but just a little 4-inch piece of metal that's maybe an 1/8 of an inch thick. It's stout enough that when I put that C-clamp on there and start cranking it down, it compresses the pistons together as a unit. Because if you just compress one, you'll tend to have the other one come up like a whack-a-mole game, and so you get the other one comes up. So you got to kind of work to get them at the same time. And unless you're using 2 C-clamps, you just want to have a little piece of bar material across that's going to aid in that. So that's what I'm going to do, and then we'll get the calipers going. So, 1 second. Okay, so there it is. What I did with the caliper is I just removed the old brake pads. I hit it with some brake cleaner and got it cleaned up. And I removed the 4 little clips that act as guides for the brake pads themselves. The new kit came with new clips, so I just installed those. There's a lot of videos on how to do this, so I'm not going to redo that. So basically, once I got the pistons on the caliper compressed with my C-clamp and my little bar of metal, I was able to install those pads, and the caliper went on without any problem. And now I've got to just torque the bolts on the caliper, and once that's in place, I can get my son to come out and stand on the brake, and I can put that axle nut back on and torque it down to, I think, 260 foot-pounds, and put the wheel on, and we're done. So I'm not going to bore you with all those details, but I'll just show you the final product when we're at the end of the project here. So thanks for listening. Okay, there we are. That's how you do it. Thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful.